South Bay ghost town sinking into the weeds, a charming East Bay suburb, a bed and breakfast with a foghorn. What do these Bay Area locales have in common? They're all islands of San Francisco Bay. Brian Hackney travels our famed waters to uncover more islands than you ever knew existed. Tour some amazing places you've never been and learn some amazing facts you'll never forget. That's next.
When you think of islands, you probably think of the tropics, of warm breezes, blue oceans, white sands. But the Bay Area has islands of its own. Maybe not the kind of islands that would attract Shauna, who is freezing to death out here on the shoals of Tiburon, but the kind of islands that attract wildlife from all over North America and provide some pretty scenic shots. There are tall islands, flat islands, skinny islands. There are islands in the North Bay, islands in the South Bay. There are man-made islands. There were even islands man-unmade. They blew them up. 19th century ship captains cursed them as navigation hazards. There are the well-known islands, like the ones over my shoulder, Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island. There's Alcatraz and Angel Islands. But how many islands are there in the Bay Area? The answer may surprise you.
48 islands are in the Bay, and they're all in the book.
The book is The Islands of San Francisco Bay, published by these guys, James Martin and Michael Lee. Now, there was a time when there were no Bay Islands. In fact, there was a time when there was no bay.
15,000 years ago, the oceans were 300 feet lower than they are now. So these islands were only hilltops.
At the end of the last ice age, the glaciers melted, the oceans rose, and flooded the valley that would become San Francisco Bay. Those hilltops became islands. So where do we begin? How about with the biggest island in the bay? Angel Island, which is in full view of the smallest island in San Francisco Bay, Elephant Rock, just off the Tiburon shore. And this is only the beginning of Islands 101. You guys, what makes an island an island? What's the definition?
Well, technically, we have it surrounded by water.
And it has to stay surrounded during high and low tide. Needle Rocks near the Golden Gate Bridge meet that standard. Elephant Rock qualifies, and so does its much larger cousin, Angel Island. You only need to cross the footbridge to climb atop Elephant Rock, but you need to take a ferry to land on Angel. We'll head over to Angel Island later in the series. Next, we island hop farther north toward the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. Here lies Red Rock Island. Like many islands in the bay, it is uninhabited. Hardly anybody lives on the islands, of course. There's very few exceptions to that, unless you're a bird. And in that case, there is one island that is spectacular.
Herons and egrets, 2 species of heron and 2 species of egrets.
Thousands come to nest on West Marin Island. Boy, that's a gorgeous sight. I grew up in the Bay Area. I've never seen anything like that. Keith Frazier was our guide.
That gives you a great view right there.
Who gave us a tour around West Marin and its neighbor, East Marin Island. The pair, like the county, were named for the celebrated Indian warrior, Chief Marin, who, legend has it, used to hide out here.
They also were called Crowley Islands because at one time he owned them.
Thomas Crowley, a tugboat baron, bought the islands in 1929. The family built a vacation home on the Eastern Isle. Today, the Marin Islands belong to you and me, but don't ever step foot on it. Because the Marin Islands, both east and west, are protected by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, so the egrets and herons may roost in peace. Now, if you want to visit a remote island, then you're going to want to head a little east of the Marin Islands to another pair of isles, the Brothers. East Brother Island, just a few yards from its twin, West Brother, is home to a lighthouse and a bed and breakfast. Stick around. Later in the series, we'll let you know how you can bed down on one of the Brothers. And north of the Brothers are the Sisters, twin islands in the middle of San Pablo Bay. And like many of the Bay Islands, they are home to a migrant population.
The Bay Area is in the middle of the Flyway Festival. All the birds that migrate from South America to North America all fly through here. So there's many birds that use the islands just to feed on and roost in the daytime that don't ever nest here.
Other islands in the same area include Santa Margarita, Jake's Island, and Rat Rock. On the bay's northern edge are a series of marshy islands, many of which were created by levees to keep bay water at bay at high tide. And also in the North Bay. Our next island is not quite as wild. In fact, can you think of an island that would house an old rocket, a beautiful gazebo? Oh, and this over here, this is a relic from the Civil War. It's an unused torpedo. Which island has that? Mare Island was once a peninsula. Then they dredged a slough and voila, you've got an island. Just before the Civil War, the Navy chose to put their first base on the west coast on Mare. They built ships here, later nuclear submarines, all the way through the Cold War. The Navy shipped out, but the city of Vallejo is slowly converting the island to commercial and residential use. You can still see the stately officers' quarters or visit the beautiful St. Peter's Chapel with its original Tiffany stained glass windows. Now I'm standing on the most visited island in San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz. Oh, this doesn't look like Alcatraz? Well, the earliest maps showed this island as being named Alcatraz, but later English explorers got the names mixed up, and instead this became Yerba Buena, and the Alcatraz that we know of became Alcatraz. And the most visited part? 280,000 commuters pass through the island each day as they head across the Bay Bridge, and some of the dirt excavated from that tunnel was used to build San Francisco's most famous man-made island right next door. Treasure Island was made for the 1939 World's Fair and, would you believe, to be San Francisco's international airport. In fact, this building was supposed to be an airline terminal and control tower. And that's not the Bay Area's only man-made island. 100 years ago, that used to be Alameda Peninsula. But the city of Oakland dredges this channel, and Alameda Peninsula becomes the man-made Alameda Island. Then we arrive at the islands of the South Bay. But they don't look much like islands. From here atop the first urban refuge in the entire United States, the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. They're not like Alcatraz or Angel Island. They're flatter, they're saltier, and they're certainly not as famous. Oh sure, they may not be tropical islands, but doggone it, they're the only islands we got. And in this series we celebrate the islands of San Francisco Bay.
Coming up, we're off to the East Bay and the Bay's only island town. Then, it's an island that once housed missiles. Today, it's a hiking and camping hotspot with some amazing views.
You're in a kitchen of 100 years ago.
An authentic Victorian kitchen.
You know, I haven't even offered you any bread or anything.
That's because the food is plastic. The kitchen is but a replica in the Alameda History Museum, as is the authentic Alameda Barbershop exhibit. So is everything here from the...
Everything is here from the barbershop, even the sink.
George Gunn is the longtime curator.
This is an exhibit featuring shoes
worn by prominent Alameda women. But in a way, Mr. Gunn doesn't need to preserve Alameda's history. Well, not all of it anyway, because the entire island of Alameda is a museum in its own right.
And one street that I hope to show you has the original street lighting from 1911.
Native Americans were here first, of course, then the Spanish, who granted the land to the Peralta family, who eventually sold it to developers in the mid-1800s.
And they purchased it for $14,000.
That's a pretty good deal. Alameda was relatively isolated. It became a little easier to get to when the ferries and the railroad came. The town exploded.
It was referred to as a bedroom city of San Francisco. We've never had urban renewal. We don't have freeways, so our housing stock hasn't been disturbed. And some of the houses that you'll see today are in their original settings.
And in 1902, the people of Alameda did something which would forever cut them off from urban growth.
You realize that Alameda was once a peninsula.
Connected to Oakland.
And when they severed or cut through the estuary, it necessitated the building of 3 bridges. So you had the Park, Fruitvale, and High Street bridges.
Alameda became an island. In addition to the bridges, they built a couple of underwater tubes as well. The Webster tube gets you on the island. The Posey, well, it gets you back off. Now, Alameda has always welcomed offshore visitors. Neptune Beach was a popular getaway for the entire Bay Area, and this amusement park, combined perhaps with Alameda's isolation, fomented Alameda's reputation as a city of firsts.
First, yeah. Well, we like to say that.
The first professional baseball game on the West Coast was played at Neptune Beach. The first snow cone was served up here, too. And the first popsicle. And in this Alameda home, one Mr. Joseph L. Rosefield invented a process whereby you hydrogenate peanut oil. What's so big about that, you say? Well, say that the next time you open up a jar of Skippy. Rosefield built a factory out on Webster Street where he produced the world's top-selling peanut butter. Alameda is also known for the Naval Air Station on the northern tip of the island, which served as a base from World War II up until the late 1990s, when it closed. So, Alameda has lost some of its past. The Skippy factory moved away in 1974. It's now a Walgreens. And Neptune Beach closed just before World War II. It's now a condominium park. But they are preparing a Neptune Beach exhibit down at the museum. Now, that doesn't mean Alameda lost all its heritage. Well, it can't. Its history is lovingly trapped on the island they built just by dredging out a channel. Now, when they dredged this out right here, they created not just one island, Alameda, but they created a second island.
67 acres of landfill were created in 1913.
The dredged up silt was used to create Government Island. The Coast Guard moved in.
The Coast Guard paid $1 to the city of Alameda for the island. So those were the days of cheap real estate, I guess.
They have since changed the name to, what else, Coast Guard Island. 3 Coast Guard cutters like this one are based here. As Coast Guard historian David Rosen explains, the island base is the Coast Guard's headquarters for the entire Pacific region.
Which includes districts in Alaska, the Northwest, it's Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, going out to Guam, as well as the state of California, and international relations with the countries that border the Pacific. All of that is now centered here in the buildings at the other end of the island.
Still to come, it's an island once known as the Ellis Island of the West. Plus, what island is Brian paddling to? It's local and it's not in the bay.
Welcome back to Eye on the Bay. I'm Brian Hackney as we continue our tour of Bay Area islands. There are many islands in the bay that you cannot get to, but there is one that has regular ferry service and you probably never visited, Angel Island. You can't drive to Angel Island or on Angel Island, but don't let that stop you from visiting this 1 square mile state park poking out of the bay just southeast of Tiburon. It only takes about 25 minutes for the ferry trip from San Francisco to here in Angel Island. Cost of a round-trip ticket was $14.50. That $14.50, by the way, is a bargain. Gets you not only a pleasant boat ride, there's hiking, history, and striking views. Man, you are at the top of the world as far as the Bay Area is concerned. This is great.
This is Ayala Cove. In 1775, Juan Ayala, a captain with the Spanish Navy, sailed into San Francisco Bay and was the first European actually to sail into the bay and moored here in the cove and used this kind of a base of operations for their entire mapping expedition of San Francisco Bay.
What do people do for fun out here?
Well, a lot of people like just to come to Ayala Cove and have a picnic. Other folks really like to get out and hike and do all the trails.
How do people get around when they come out here?
Either by bike, or they walk, or our concessionaire has a tram service that does a historic audio tram around the island. They also have a shuttle bus that can get people from one location to another.
You won't get far on the island before you run across some sort of old military building. They're scattered all over, some restored, some crumbling to the ground.
There's, over 100 years of military history here.
Since the Civil War, various military groups have used the island as a strategic point of defense.
Camp Reynolds originally was established in 1863 to help defend the Golden Gate from the Confederates. At that time, there was fear the Confederates may want to attack San Francisco for the gold in the mint or the guns over the Benicia Arsenal. This is the Bakehouse, which was built in 1863. It's the oldest building on the island and one of the first.
Abraham Lincoln was president.
Abraham Lincoln was president, exactly.
It smells like 1863 in here. In 1954, Angel Island became one of 19 places where the Army installed Nike missiles. By 1962, the missiles became obsolete, and when the Army pulled them out, it ended a military presence that began during the Civil War and ended during the Cold War. Besides its role as a military base, Angel Island was also the gate to America for Asian immigrants and Ellis Island of the West. How many people stepped over these waves onto this dock and entered Angel Island?
Probably about 200,000. This is the detention barracks, we call it. And inside, the walls are covered with poetry, carved by Chinese immigrants that were housed here.
What did the poem say?
So many of the stories are very poignant about how they got here and what they felt about wanting to come to Golden Mountain, which is what the Chinese called America.
These poles supported barracks. A bunk here, a bunk here, a bunk here. 3 deep. And this is what you'd sleep on if you were an immigrant. The military and immigration elements here have faded. Today's true stars of the island are beauty and serenity. How'd the deer get here?
The deer swam, primarily from Tiburon, about a mile across Raccoon Strait. And we talked to people today that see them swimming across the strait and when they're boating over to Angel Island.
Boy, you talk about a commanding view for a picnic lunch. Alcatraz, the city skyline. How many visitors do you have here?
On a clear day, you can see all 7 bridges of San Francisco Bay, San Francisco, the East Bay, Marin County, up into the Napa and Sonoma valleys.
And you can camp here. Imagine setting up your tent with this backdrop.
There's 9 family campsites plus 1 that is for the disabled, and a group campsite, what we call the kayak camp. And you can either paddle in by boat or you can walk in or get a ride from the shuttle if you come in by public ferry.
And then almost before you know it, it's time to go. The last ferries leave at around 4:30. Now, I have to tell you, I have done a lot of stuff for Eye on the Bay. I've been doing it for a couple of years now. Of everything that I've done, man, this was one of the coolest. It truly was. And if you want more information on visiting Angel Island, log on to our website, cbs5.com/Eye on the Bay. We'll have all the info.
When we come back, which island is Brian about to paddle to? Hear the clues and guess where he is.
Welcome to Eye on the Bay. I'm Brian Hackney. See that rock out there? Needle Rock? Is it just a rock or is it an island? You can classify it as an island. It's surrounded by water all year long, just like 48 other islands in the Bay Area. This is the second night of a two-part series when we are exploring the various islands of the Bay Area. Well, they may not be tropical paradises, but they are steeped in history, folklore, and major tourist attractions, just like that one out there, Alcatraz. We don't spend a lot of time on Alcatraz because you've heard it and you've seen it before. What we're going to focus on are places you have not heard or seen before, and we're going to begin with one of the most striking, South Bay, north of San Jose, an island that is still an island, but the town that it used to house is slowly sinking into the mire from which it sprung. This is Station Island, one of the very few islands in the South Bay. Surrounded by salt flats, lost in the marshes, it was once home to a tiny town called Drawbridge.
In the heyday, this is a thriving community. You had hotels, you had bars, you had a dance hall.
It was once a pristine island, rich with sea life, and a stopping point for waterfowl on the Pacific Flyway. Today, it's just a few structures decaying into the pickleweed and mud. In 1879, the South Pacific Coast Railroad opened a new line to transport quicksilver, fruit, and redwood lumber.
It was actually an attempt to connect Newark with Santa Cruz through the Santa Cruz Mountains.
What did it look like back then? Probably not a lot different from the way it looks now. I mean, in the South Bay, it was an enormous expanse of wetlands. It didn't have the bridge, and it didn't have the people. But it had the birds. And when you combined the birds and the trains, it wasn't long before you got hunters. So this is the place.
This is where we start walking the drawbridge.
So this is as far as we can drive.
This is the end of the road for driving now. Of course, you couldn't drive here back in the days of drawbridge.
Good heavens, yes, look at that. You can just see the rooftops.
Just in the marsh, and that's where we're going to go hiking now. So let's look both ways so we don't get smashed. Let's go.
We had to dodge freight and commute trains that passed several times a day. What was that building?
This building is unique. It's the only one that was built like this in the entire drawbridge. Notice that it has a curved roof, and there's two theories about who built this. It was either railroad men. If you look at it, it's sort of the shape of a railroad car, or it was built by boat makers who used to live here, because a lot of the architecture is a lot like how you would build a boat.
Well, the only thing living there now are those birds. That was close! So hunters would what, spend the weekend here?
Yeah, Brian, they would spend the weekend or they would spend the whole duck season here.
So this is a two-bedroom suite?
So most of the houses were two bedrooms. So you would have the bedroom like this area here with the bunk beds and the old closet here. And then in this room you can still see the shelves of the kitchen and the sinks and where the stove was.
No kidding. All taken over by raccoons now.
Well, raccoons, but if you look in the closet, there's a bird nest.
I would have to guess the reason for the name of the community is the structure we're about to step onto.
Well, it is, and it's kind of a misnomer. This is called Drawbridge, and there never was a drawbridge like you think about.
What's the name of this structure?
It's a turn bridge.
So they should have called it Turnbridge, not Drawbridge.
Exactly.
See what you learn on Eye in the Bay. So the railroad comes through. You've got fairly undisturbed wetlands at that point. A lot of birds. What happens next?
Well, then the railroad men's friends found out that there was actually a place to stay in this beautiful area, great hunting opportunities, and they started paying the railroad men 50 cents a night to stay in their extra bedroom. And then they started figuring out, why am I paying this guy 50 cents when I can just build my own shack out here? And that was the beginning of having multiple buildings in the town of Drawbridge.
In 1902, the Sprung Hotel was complete, and the town, now known as Drawbridge, appeared on the official Southern Pacific schedule.
We actually had year-round residents. We had market hunters.
So if you sat down to a plate of duck at Tadich's restaurant in 1890, it probably was shot on drawbridge.
It was probably a lot of the ducks that you find in Chinatown back in those days came from drawbridge. There was lots of gun clubs. That was probably the first thing that came up. And then the private residences, the hotels, stores. And then of course during the Prohibition, people started making their own beer out here.
We also understand that there might have been some affiliation with ladies of the evening.
One of the hotels there is a roulette wheel. And one story we've been told was that each of the ladies of the night had their name on the roulette wheel, and that's how they were selected to do their business.
At about the same time, the population of the South Bay was exploding. Sound familiar? Pollution and runoff from the surrounding communities degraded the habitat. The fisheries died, the fish went away, the bird population declined, and so did drawbridge. It wasn't exactly sunk, but it was sinking. These houses look like they have just slumped into the marsh, and I guess they have.
Well, they have, because of the subsidence. That overdrafting of the groundwater in the local communities caused this whole area to fall at least 2.5 feet.
Finally, how did it decay and die? When did the last resident leave?
Well, the last people survived through the 70s.
Good heavens. And then, the renaissance of drawbridge. What has happened since?
Now we're beginning the largest tidal wetland restoration project in the West Coast.
One final thing. Not only has drawbridge disappeared, the only way to see it is the way you're doing it now, because it is off limits. Nobody is allowed into drawbridge anymore. Stick around, because when we come back, we head up the bay from Station Island to the islands of the peninsula, what's being done to save them, and then, if you can sleep through loud noises, this may be one of the most memorable island getaways anywhere. Welcome back to Eye on the Bay. I'm Brian Hackney. As we continue our tour of Bay Area islands, we arrive at the South Bay, which has none of the famous islands. Or have you ever heard of the Bear Islands, Bird Island, Greco Island? Marlo Tellez has. They're right over there, across the Dumbarton Bridge, and so's Marlo.
I don't know if you can see off in the distance, but that's the Dumbarton Bridge. Clustered off a small section of the peninsula shores are 5 islands crucial to bay life.
As a matter of fact, they're the heart and lungs of the bay. And without the baylands, the bay would be a dead body of water.
Ralph Nobles knows all about these Redwood City Islands, situated between Redwood Shores to the north and the port of Redwood City to the south. He helped save 3 of them, collectively known as Bear Island. If it weren't for this man, Bear Islands maybe wouldn't even be here, right?
Well, that's true. Me and a few others.
3,000 acres make up Inner, Middle, and Outer Bear. Until the mid-1960s, most of the land was devoted to salt production, a practice that severely threatened the island's native vegetation and wildlife. Harbor seals and 2 endangered species, the California clapper rail and the salt marsh harvest mouse. In 1982, Bear Island was slated to become the next Redwood Shores, the neighboring housing and commercial development to the north.
My wife and I just thought, gee, they can't do that.
As longtime Redwood City residents and avid sailors, Ralph and his late wife Carolyn led the fight to save Bear. So you rallied the troops, so to speak.
So we rallied the troops and we collected signatures and we got a referendum on the ballot. And no one thought we had a chance.
Against all odds, they won by a mere 40 votes. Today, Bear is protected by the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay Wildlife Refuge, and it's being restored. So this is precisely what Save the Bay is working to restore. David Lewis is the executive director of Save the Bay, one of the organizations that's helping the National Wildlife Refuge restore Middle and Inner Bear. Of the 3 Bear Islands, Inner Bear Island is the only one that's really accessible to the public. Just off 101 in Redwood City, you take the Whipple Avenue exit in either direction. Now people come here to run, to walk, or just to enjoy the scenery along the 3-mile trail that surrounds the island. Outer Bear is the largest of the three, and its tidal marsh has been preserved. It's Middle Bear, accessible by boat only, that Save the Bay volunteers are canoeing to pull weeds and improve habitat. Just south of Bear is the South Bay's largest undisturbed tidal wetland, Greco Island.
So this is the way the entire coastline of the bay looked like before we came in.
Wow, and how big is this?
This is about 2,000 acres.
National Wildlife Refuge Manager Clyde Morris says Greco is the model island in the best shape of them all.
This is my dream, to have much more of the South Bay restored to this habitat.
Bird Island off the tip of Redwood Shores is the smallest of the cluster. Clyde says it's been taken over by feral cats. In the end, Bear, Greco, and Bird Islands are invaluable to our region, and restoring and maintaining them are key to our bay's survival. Just ask the man who's dedicated his time to saving them.
Restoration has actually started, and it won't be long until this is a healthy wetland.
Our island hopping continues with a visit to one that's for sale and an island to get a cozy night's sleep. And then see if you can guess where this mystery island is. Welcome back to Eye on the Bay as we explore some islands in our Great Bay. Now, if you've got lots of cash and you're looking to invest, correspondent Dave Stoelk has an island to sell you, as well as a tip for an island to get away from it all.
In the mid-1800s, prospectors burrowed their way into the red rocks on this island in search of manganese ore. Essential for steel production, the island became known as, well, what else? Red Rock Island. Today, the isle, which sits just a few hundred yards south of the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, is uninhabited, but it does hold the distinction of being the Bay Area's only privately owned island.
And it can all be yours for a price.
The island's owner, an expatriate who lives in Thailand, is putting Red Rock on the block for $10 million. But buyer beware, as the island sits atop 3 different counties, Red Rock is effectively wrapped in bales of bureaucratic red tape, preventing its development. So, Fantasy Island it's not.
But if you don't have that kind of cash, there's another way you can enjoy the island life here on San Francisco Bay.
Who wouldn't want to live on an island in the middle of the bay?
Katie and Alon Stewart are caretakers of the East Brother Island Lighthouse Station and Bed and Breakfast.
He's the dishwasher and the captain, I'm the cook, we're both housekeepers, reservations, phone calls, you name it.
East Brother Island is just a stone's throw from its twin to the west.
That's the West Brother.
Correct.
This is the East Brother.
West Brother Island is home to a few birds, not much else. Humans, however, may roost on East Brother. Elon will take guests by boat a quarter-mile off Point Richmond so they may stay in the comforts of this Victorian home. While the wind and water may rage outside, it's cozy on the inside. A true getaway from everything. Once you're on the island, you're isolated. There's no television, just a few board games to keep you occupied. Oh, and then there's the view. There are 5 rooms from which to choose. Rates range from $295 to $415 per couple. Meals prepared by Katie are included.
Now, at this bed and breakfast, let's just say they have a wake-up call that you're not going to be able to sleep through.
East Brother, you see, is an official United States Coast Guard navigation station. The station was established in 1873. The Victorian house housed 2 lighthouse keepers and their families. That's what it took to keep the lamp lit and the foghorn capable of bellowing a warning 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Well, the Coast Guard automated in '69.
That's when they installed this 3-foot-high thingamabob, which does all the work it once took 2 families to warn passing ships. So the families left, and the island's Grand Victorian fell into disrepair.
And a bunch of locals had a problem with that, so they got together and started the nonprofit and did a huge restoration.
The bed and breakfast is a not-for-profit business licensed by the Coast Guard, which supports the upkeep of the historical structures. B&B visitors, in turn, get to explore the relics.
And this, of course, is the focal point, literally, to any lighthouse, the light.
It is but a 150-watt light bulb, that's it, which, thanks to a powerful lens, can be seen all the way from downtown San Francisco, 14 miles away. But guests should be careful not to flip the light switch. Yeah, that switch. After all these years, the light is still used as a navigation beacon, but the island's modern foghorn goes off automatically whenever that 3-foot-something robot detects fog. But for the guests' entertainment, Elon will fire up the old horn the old-fashioned way by cranking the engine, oiling the parts, pressurizing the huge tanks, and then... And for those guests who don't appreciate the island music, well, you're stuck here, at least until Elon can take you back to shore.
Kind of like an adventure bed and breakfast for the bed and breakfast crowd.
Oh, and leave the light on.
It's an island in the Bay Area, but it's not in San Francisco Bay. Take a paddle with me to this mystery island with a piggy past. Welcome back to Eye on the Bay as we wrap up our 2-part look at islands inside San Francisco Bay by going outside San Francisco Bay to that island. Now, you might remember last night we gave you a few clues as to where this is, and your hints were Swan, San Andreas Fault, and Shellfish. And we've got Chris with Blue Water Kayaking to tell us, first, Chris, where are we?
Well, we're at Hog Island, about 2 miles from shore. It's right in the middle of Tamales Bay.
Wow. And there's actually 2 islands here. There's this Hog Island, and then that little island just to the south. What's that one?
That's correct. I like to call that Piglet Island. And this one,
this is
Hog.
a smaller one.
The true name is Duck Island, and this is Hog Island.
Great. Why don't we pull ashore and you can tell us a little bit about the history of this?
Sure.
All right. So shall we pull in right here?
Okay.
All right. Landfall on Hog Island. Now we're about 4 miles in from the mouth of Tamales Bay, from where it empties into the ocean essentially.
Yes.
Why Hog Island?
Good question. Hog Island because there were hogs here at one time, and there was a hog farmer, and he brought about 12 hogs, and
You're kidding?
Yeah.
And the name stuck. But I noticed that now there's a lot of birds on Hog Island.
Exactly. Now it's incredibly important, especially for the double-crested cormorants. You can see them nesting back here. There's probably 200-300 of them that live here.
That's an extraordinary sight.
Yeah.
And people can actually, just as we have done, you can visit the island, right?
Exactly, yeah. The west side is wide open for people to land with their kayaks or a boat. You cannot land on the east side because that's where it's very sensitive to wildlife.
Okay. No camping, no fires, but you can come out and stroll for yourself if you manage to find a way to get out here.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing that's fascinating about this, Chris, is that the San Andreas Fault actually splits the island.
That's right.
Yeah, and you can really see that from the air. We've got an aerial view, and you can just see right where the fault comes ashore.
Yeah.
It is cool. Now, what are we looking at now?
Right now, we've got about 100 double-crested cormorants out here on the spit, and then in the foreground are Brandt's geese, and then just beyond that, at the end, are brown pelicans. I'm sure you can see the white pelican, which is actually the largest bird in North America, on the right.
That's the largest bird in North America?
That's right, 109-inch wingspan.
Bigger than a condor.
That's correct.
That is so cool. Thank you for showing us that, Chris. That is really neat. And I mean, you don't think of Bay Area islands as being out in the tropics. Obviously, you can freeze your keister off. But I mean, talk about places to stay, things to see, the history and the natural life. It's been a great 2 nights. And if you want more information about how you can see all this for yourself, log on to our website, cbs5.com/Eye on the Bay. And from Blue Water Kayaking, Chris, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you again next time. I'm Brian Hackney. Good night.